Over the years, WWE has produced some incredibly compelling television. The Stone Cold Steve Austin vs. Vince McMahon feud will go down as one of professional wrestling's most important stories, yet it is one that almost didn't happen. Daniel Bryan proved he was one of the best professional wrestlers in the entire world outside and inside of WWE, but he almost didn't get to the top of the WWE mountain. Pardon the wrestling, but I am Bryan, and today we look at the top 10 times WWE were forced to change a story. If this is your first time with us, hit the subscribe button for more content just like this. Here at Pardon the Wrestling, we drop in-depth looks at professional wrestling like this every Sunday night. And check out our most recent videos where we let ChatGPT book a potential AEW vs. WWE Forbidden Door and the complete history of WWE Money in the Bank. And before we get started, hit that like button as well, as that'll help other people find this video just like you did. While Vince McMahon can be described as many things, one of his traits is his complete stubbornness. Many people will consider John Cena never turning heel after 2004 being among them, but as we've seen in recent years, Vince and WWE haven't been afraid to turn their chosen one babyface into a monster heel. But it isn't just a wrestler's alignment that we look upon in today's video. WWE has had to pivot several times in their history, and without further ado, let's discuss the top 10 times WWE was forced to change a story. Number 10. Woo Woo Woo, Z True Long Island Story. The early days of social media was quite the unknown place. While sites like Facebook and Twitter may have existed long before the telling of this particular tale, proving yourself within the confines of the internet and not on television wasn't exactly the most common thing to happen in the early goings of the 2010s. While we are a long ways away from the indie god Matt Cardona, as Zack Ryder, he portrayed your typical Jersey Shore knockoff character. Within the confines of WWE TV, the successes he reached weren't particularly memorable, but once Zack Ryder began doing the Z True Long Island Story series on YouTube, fans began to take notice. Ryder had gotten himself so over through his YouTube videos and social media posts that it began bleeding into WWE television, where fans were going nuts for the guy. After betting on himself, Ryder's efforts finally paid off, as WWE had no other choice but to give in to what the fans wanted, and by the end of 2011, we saw Zack Ryder become the United States Champion, proving to would-be wrestlers out there that if you want it bad enough, you can absolutely get what you deserve. And if the independent scene is anything to go by, it seems Cardona is doing quite alright. Number 9. Matt vs. Edge and Lita. I won't go into the details of the real-life love triangle that was between Adam Copeland, Amy Dumas, and Matt Hardy. Instead, we'll focus on how this elevated an upper mid-carder into Hall of Fame status. At the time of the real-life cheating, Edge was portraying a heel character on television already, and while plans were made for Edge to be put into the main event scene, including being WWE's first winner of Money in the Bank, it wasn't until the pairing with Lita that Edge truly became elevated to a different level. Edge would suffer a legit injury around this time and would introduce his cutting-edge talk show, and at the time would dub himself the Rated R Superstar, something he is still known as to this day. WWE took the real-life problems between three and turned it into a work, or in layman's terms, a wrestling storyline. In real life, one would view Matt Hardy as the hero of the story, but on air it hardly did him any favors. Matt ended up losing the feud, in which ultimately saw Edge defending his Money in the Bank briefcase in a loser leaves Raw match, which Matt Hardy lost. This sent him to SmackDown and eventually the revitalized ECW brand, where he would go on to eventually win the ECW Championship, but to say Matt did anything worth of note out of this feud would be overstating it. For Edge, it truly was a launching pad, winning Money in the Bank, receiving nuclear heel heat, cashing in on John Cena, becoming WWE Champion, cashing in Money in the Bank a second time on The Undertaker, the list goes on and on. Money in the Bank was a large reason for Edge's rise to the main event scene, but so is the real-life consequences of his affair with Lita. Utilizing this situation into WWE television only amplified the despicableness of Edge, and it'd be hard to imagine where his career would be without it. Number 8. NXT Game Show to Black and Gold. When I do top 10 lists, I hate spoiling a latter part of the list, but just know this will not be the first time we discuss the NXT Black and Gold, nor will it be the first time we discuss Daniel Bryan. In the mid-2000s, WWE hosted a pair of reunion shows for Extreme Championship Wrestling entitled One Night Stand. These shows were incredible successes, so much so that WWE decided it was a good idea to make the reunion a full-time venture, as WWE created a third brand, ECW, which would air on the Sci-Fi Network, a subsidiary of NBC Universal. Initially, ECW was presented in a way to differentiate it from Raw and SmackDown, including the visual presentation of the show and the nomenclature of the wrestlers that would appear on the show. ECW originals like RVD, who was WWE champion at the time, the Sandman, Sabu, and Balls Mahoney would be featured on the program. Paul Heyman was the on-air and off-air man in charge of the ECW brand, including the creative. A few months later, he would lose that and ECW would begin to strip back what made it unique, including the rules of ECW matches that made it so popular, and almost as soon as it started, ECW was literally just there in name as one of WWE's brands. This would go on for a few years before the idea would be scrapped entirely, and the third brand for WWE would cease to exist. What wouldn't cease to exist is WWE's need to have programming on during that time slot due to their agreement with NBC. And with that, NXT was born, which was a hybrid of a live event and a reality show. This was a place for WWE's developmental territory at the time, FCW, to feature its ready for the main roster stars. These included the likes of Wade Barrett and Daniel Bryan. If you were a big fan of independent wrestling at the time, Daniel Bryan's inclusion in this was a huge selling point, as many people were excited with what the American Dragon would be able to do in the WWE setting. Turns out, WWE didn't do him any favors for quite a while, including having him go 0-10 in the games that would be featured in this version of NXT, and having him essentially vote himself off. If you watched this version of NXT, you likely cringed at the format and would gladly let it rot in the vault. And you may be happy to know that future stars such as Seth Rollins and Big E were extremely close to being involved in this format until WWE canceled this version of NXT. Regardless, discussing this version of NXT is worthy of its own video, but what we are here to say is WWE had a tremendous pivot with NXT. The eventual failure of NXT the game show led to WWE featuring its developmental talent as its own separate brand, and this would be done exclusively on the WWE network at the time. In 2012, the WWE Network had just arrived, and along with it would be the very first live event to be streamed, known as NXT Arrival. This would feature matches such as Claudio Castagnoli, then known as Antonio Cesaro in WWE versus Sami Zayn, as well as matches featuring a young Juice Robinson, Saraya, and Pac. The willingness of WWE to give huge independent stars such as Claudio, El Generico, Kevin Steen, Prince Devitt, and Samoa Joe a platform to showcase their talents didn't go unnoticed, as NXT quickly became a cult favorite and a place where the best non-WWE wrestlers in the world wanted to be. The NXT Black and Gold era features some of WWE's best bell-to-bell wrestling in its history and gave a place for future stars such as Seth Rollins, Charlotte Flair, Kevin Owens, and Sasha Banks a place to own their craft. It was a special place and time in the history of WWE, and WWE's change of NXT from a variety show to a showcase of WWE's future was an incredible change, and while it isn't certainly the same as it is nowadays, it still provides a place for WWE's next generation of superstars to get their feet wet on a big stage. Number 7, Triple H, the heir apparent. Since we are talking about NXT Black and Gold, let's talk about the reason it was successful. Paul Levesque, better known as Triple H. Triple H has long been seen as the heir apparent to the WWE empire ever since the start of his marriage to Stephanie McMahon. Shane had been in and out of the company, and while Shane may have been born in the business, Levesque is someone who has loved the wrestling business his entire life. One of the last students of Killer Kowalski, the future King of Kings has had quite the interesting ride in the world of professional wrestling. While he had spent time with WWE's biggest competitor in the 90s, World Championship Wrestling, as the terribly named Terror Rising, it wasn't until his Blue Blood gimmick of Hunter Hearst Helmsley that he would gain traction as a future perennial main eventer. Was favoritism and nepotism involved in some ways? Perhaps, but it's clear in the late 90s that Levesque was incredibly charismatic and a good hand in the ring. Eventually, he would begin a relationship with the boss's daughter, and off to the races we went. Fast forward a couple decades later, the boss would appoint Levesque as the head booker of the NXT brand, and we would witness something that in the world of the WWE seemed like a fever dream then and even now. If you were in particular a fan of Ring of Honor, then NXT ran by Triple H was probably right up your alley, with the likes of Adam Cole, Red Dragon, Kevin Owens, Johnny Gargano, and Sami Zayn sharing time in the ring together. NXT TakeOver events were viewed as WWE's best in-ring events with Triple H involved, and were often seen as can't miss. It also truly revitalized women's wrestling, featuring surefire future WWE Hall of Famers in the likes of Becky Lynch, Charlotte Flair, Bayley, and Sasha Banks. Fast forward a few years later after that, when allegations pushed Vince McMahon out of WWE temporarily, this left a pretty big hole in WWE's creative structure, as Vince ran the WWE's writing team and by extension, the company's main storylines. Paul Levesque was tasked to take over the main roster's creative duties, and while nowadays Vince is remotely involved, largely this has been Levesque's ship to sail. Since Levesque's regime has began, WWE business is in a place it has never been before, seeing record profits, record attendance, and in general a positive vibe from fans around the world. When WWE's business was down, AEW had the perfect time to strike, and it did, as AEW found a very good foothold in the wrestling landscape. However, since the appointment of Levesque to creative, WWE has chipped away at AEW's audience, which surely featured lapsed WWE fans at the time that were fed up with Vince's way of doing things. For WWE, Levesque as the main contact for talent, as well as the man in charge of talent's on-air personas, backstage morale has seen an increase for the better, and for WWE, this change can easily see it move it up from number 7 on this list to a lot higher, but for now we will give this time to grow. All hail the King of Kings. Number 6, WrestleMania is too big for one night. The pandemic rocked everybody's world in the early part of this decade, and in the summer of 2023, some people are unfortunately still dealing with the effects of COVID-19 and the disruption it's brought to everyday life. The world of professional wrestling was no different, as it forced WWE to completely change several aspects of their presentation. For some time, WWE held shows at their Performance Center in Florida to no fans, and going back to watch shows from this time can be quite the challenge. There are times when the wrestlers really made the most of it, like Bayley and Michael Cole's rivalry getting turned up to 11 during this, but the lack of crowd noise for the most part made watching wrestling just feel lifeless. The Thunderdome was introduced to help mitigate some of the lifelessness and make the best out of a bad situation. But before we get to the Thunderdome, almost at the immediate onset of the pandemic, WrestleMania 36 was scheduled to take place on April 5th at Raymond James Stadium in Tampa, Florida. However, due to the pandemic, some things changed. Not only would WrestleMania be done in front of 0 fans for the first time in its history, but to my recollection, it would be recorded a week prior to its airing. WrestleMania would air on a tape delay spread out over 2 days, Saturday, April 4th and Sunday, April 5th. This WrestleMania was deemed too big for one night at the time, with 18 matches scheduled, including 2 cinematic matches with the Boneyard match and the Firefly Funhouse match. WrestleMania 36, with pre-shows being added in, would amass to an over 8-hour runtime. Too big indeed. As a viewer, I thought it was a brilliant idea, and one that in my mind I predicted WWE would feel the same way, especially if a live paying audience was there. And ever since WrestleMania 36, WWE has opted for 2 nights for the Showcase of the Immortals. Anyone that's been in attendance to this marathon of shows for WWE or AEW knows how exhausting they can be as time goes on. And with WWE often doing WrestleManias outside nowadays where heat comes into play, splitting up the card over 2 nights just makes all the sense in the world. I, for one, am thankful we get a whole weekend's worth of WrestleMania, and at the same time, get them in appetizing portions to boot. Number 5, Pipe Bomb. You're going to notice a theme within the final few entrants in this video. It's the fact that WWE has certain acts that prove they were extremely good at this pro wrestling thing, and was shown a constant stubbornness to let those wrestlers prove exactly that. And CM Punk's Pipe Bomb promo is one extremely prevalent example of just this. Independent wrestling is something that began to blow up around the country with the demise of WCW and ECW, and chief among those independent groups was AEW's current second brand known as Ring of Honor. ROH provided a proving ground for future would-be Hall of Famers with the likes of Bryan Danielson, Samoa Joe, AJ Styles, and of course the man we are discussing in this example, CM Punk. It was known throughout Ring of Honor that Punk was leaving for WWE, so when he won the ROH Championship and proceeded to sign his WWE contract on the belt itself, it created an amazing moment in what would become the Summer of Punk. Fast forward some time later, Punk was a multi-time world champion in WWE, but never won WWE's crown jewel, the WWE Championship. Heading into the summer of 2011, he was going to be able to challenge for it at Money in the Bank in Chicago. But before we get there, we got what could be considered one of WWE's greatest promos of all time. We would eventually get to the aforementioned Money in the Bank, which happened to be the very first WWE event I attended, and I could not have picked a better one. I was standing witness to one of the greatest reactions I'll ever hear in person, and I also got what many consider to be one of WWE's greatest matches ever. CM Punk didn't re-sign with WWE until that night, or at least we're told, and WWE's willingness to lean into a quote-unquote indie darling truly, for the first time, turned this dastardly heel into a babyface, which was in line with what fans wanted. It was truly a move that WWE benefited from. And for CM Punk, it made him into possibly the biggest name inside of professional wrestling. Number 4, Acknowledge Me. stubbornness, the irony of the failed attempt to push Roman Reigns as the WWE's top babyface, as they went so long with John Cena in the same exact role and would get some of the most divisive reactions. Yet they chose to go against the fans' reactions in regards to Roman's time on top. The Shield's debut at Survivor Series over 10 years ago is one of the most iconic moments in WWE history. It featured one member of a wrestling dynasty in Roman Reigns and two of wrestling's biggest stars outside of WWE in the names of Tyler Black and Jon Moxley, or better known in WWE as Seth Rollins and Dean Ambrose. While Ambrose didn't spend much time in NXT, Seth did and was one of the Black and Gold's biggest names, including being the inaugural NXT champion. Together, these three made a huge impact debuting at Survivor Series together and taking out Ryback and John Cena, allowing CM Punk to retain his championship. A Shield breakup, a Rumble win, several championship victories, and a Shield reunion later, one thing that was noticeable when watching WWE television was the fact that Roman Reigns was not getting over as WWE's top babyface despite his placement on the card. Not much longer after that, real life got in the way. Before joining WWE, Roman Reigns had battled and defeated leukemia. Unfortunately, however, the cancer returned in 2018. Roman would step away from WWE for quite some time, and in early 2019 he returned, and we were greeted to this wonderful news.
The good news is, I'm in remission, y'all.
Roman, for the most part up until the pandemic, remained out of the title picture, but once COVID became the world's biggest heel in 2020, due to Roman's immunocompromised health, he took time off from WWE around the time of WrestleMania 36. He would return at SummerSlam, attacking both Bray Wyatt and Braun Strowman during the show's main event, and a few days later on SmackDown, Roman had turned heel. Roman would go on to win the Universal Championship in a triple threat against the aforementioned Wyatt and Strowman, and Roman has held that championship ever since, which was August of 2020. Fast forward 3.5 years later, Roman added the WWE Championship to his collection and has amassed over 1,000 days consecutively as a world champion, and has been the middle of WWE's biggest storylines ever since. But Roman has grown into a top tier heel with his family, Paul Heyman, and Sami Zayn by his side over the last few years, and has produced what would be considered WWE's most compelling television in decades. The final payoff of this story could potentially make this even higher on the list, but we haven't told the final chapters yet. And while we are closer to the end of this bloodline story and potentially Roman's time as champion, one thing is for sure. WWE turning Roman was not only what was best for Roman Reigns as a character, but considering WWE has never been more popular and more profitable, it is clearly
what's right for this business.
Number 3, WrestleMania. Quick personal story, but Bryan Danielson main evented the very first wrestling show I ever attended. It was back in August of 2006, in which he defended the Ring of Honor Championship in an hour-long match with hometown hero of Chicago, Colt Cabana. That match and that show opened my eyes to a different style of professional wrestling I did not know existed. It made me appreciate the art form of professional wrestling on a different level, and to this day forged a lifelong obsession with the sport. Fast forward a couple years later, I was excited for Bryan Danielson to sign with WWE and get a chance to show what he can do on a national stage. I was unfortunately met with what would become the inaugural vision for NXT, which we discussed earlier, and we get to see him constantly belittled on TV despite being given the opportunity to go the distance against Chris Jericho and look credible in the defeat. The constant disparaging on commentary through Michael Cole and overall disdain shown from the higher ups at WWE made it seem like the American Dragon may not be long for a great run in WWE. But the great ones always find a way. Which is even more impressive to say, considering Danielson, known as Daniel Bryan in WWE, would be fired pretty soon after debuting when he went a little too far during the debut of the Nexus. Daniel Bryan would head back to the independent scene for a little while before being brought back as the returning hero at SummerSlam a few months later. For years, Daniel Bryan would continue to be a mainstay in the mid-card scene, battling for the United States Championship, as well as a memorable run as a tag team champion with Kane as part of Team Hell No. One thing was obvious though. Through his in-ring prowess and his ability to be incredibly entertaining with Kane and otherwise, the fans started getting behind the leader of the Yes movement. Segments would get hijacked, fans would go absolutely bonkers for him, and fans would even boo Rey Mysterio for the first time because of Bryan. What made this incredibly frustrating in real time was how prominent the disrespect the McMahon family show on live television. By patronizing the audiences, saying that they listened to the WWE Universe ad nauseum, and when the audience was constantly telling them that they wanted Daniel Bryan to get his moment in the sun, they were constantly denied. Batista was returning for another WWE run, and he was on a collision course with WWE World Heavyweight Champion at the time, Randy Orton. WWE likes to utilize celebrities, and at the time, Batista was in the midst of his Hollywood star continuing to shine with roles in movies such as Guardians of the Galaxy. Toss in the fact that Batista has history with Orton as a former fellow member of Evolution, on paper the match writes itself. But not at this point in time, because people wanted to see Daniel Bryan succeed. Despite WWE probably telling you that this was their plan all along, and kudos if it actually was, but there's not a chance in hell it was, WWE finally did succumb to the pressure of those watching and included Daniel Bryan in the story for the championship heading into WrestleMania that year. To make it happen, Daniel Bryan had to beat Triple H in the opening match of the show to be added to the main event against Orton and Batista. Otherwise, there would have been an Evolution triple threat, which again on paper is interesting, but not at this time. Bryan would go on to beat Triple H and would go on to be crowned as the WWE World Heavyweight Champion in what is viewed as one of the most iconic moments in WWE history, and a moment that almost didn't happen. Number 2, the Montreal Screwjob. If you're a professional wrestling fan, it'd be hard to be unfamiliar with the Montreal Screwjob, but in case I'm the first person to bring this up to you, here's what happened. Bret Hart was the WWE champion at the time, and with his contract running out, WCW was looking to sign WWE's top star at the time, and Vince told him to go ahead and negotiate with them. While the offer was lucrative enough for Bret to accept it, Vince acknowledged this but did request Bret to drop the title to Shawn Michaels, whom at the time was not someone Bret was a very huge fan of. He agreed to drop it to Shawn, but not in Canada. Well, Survivor Series 1997 came around, which was in Montreal, and a match between the two was set, with Bret believing he would win the match. However, when he was putting his own move, the sharpshooter, referee Earl Hebner called for the bell with Vince at ringside. Vince, to prevent Bret from taking the WWE Championship onto WCW television, much like Medusa had done some time back with the Women's Championship, screwed Bret out of the title. The story's been fully documented by WWE themselves, Dark Side of the Ring, Wrestling with Shadows, and more if you're interested in a far more detailed version, but we are here to talk about the aftermath. Vince's willingness to go against his own script to prevent Bret leaving with the title belt sparked the next era of WWE television. Vince became instantly vilified for this and would go on to create the Mr. McMahon character, WWE's biggest heel throughout the late 90s and professional wrestling's most successful period, the Attitude Era. Vince's decision to legitimately screw Bret Hart would spark the Attitude Era, which would catapult wrestling into the mainstream for the first time since the Hulkamania days. And this would help shoot Stone Cold Steve Austin into superstardom with his rivalry with Vince McMahon, and WWE as we know it would be changed forever. Before we get to our number one time that WWE was forced to change a story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more content just like this. And also hit the like button as well, as that is the easiest way to help your fellow wrestling fans find this video. And number 1 on our list, Austin 3:16 and the curtain call. At the beginning of the video, we discussed how Stone Cold vs. Vince McMahon may not have happened, and we can look at the incident known as the curtain call for the reason why. If you happen to not know the origin story of Stone Cold Steve Austin, let me enlighten you, because we only have so much time, we will only discuss his WWE origin story. Austin came to the World Wrestling Federation as the Ringmaster, a so-called Master of the Ring, under the guidance of the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase. Fast forward a little time later, he would adopt the persona known as Stone Cold Steve Austin. Concurrently around this time, coming up soon was the annual King of the Ring tournament, where WWE would hold a tournament that was usually done to platform an up-and-coming superstar. Set to win the 1996 version of this tournament was Hunter Hearst Helmsley, better known to fans simply as Triple H. Also happening concurrently was the pending departure of Diesel and Razor Ramon, or Kevin Nash and Scott Hall respectively. Both of these guys were bound for rival company World Championship Wrestling, WCW. At the time, it was taboo for wrestling's good guys and bad guys to be seen being friendly together outside of shows, because it was a way to keep the illusion of professional wrestling alive. At a live show event at Madison Square Garden, Nash, Hall, Triple H, and Shawn Michaels, who were all on opposite sides of alignment as babyfaces and heels, all embraced each other in the middle of the ring, absolutely destroying this illusion, which was something called breaking kayfabe. With Nash and Hall leaving and not being punishable since there was really nothing that could be done, and with Shawn Michaels the WWE champion at the time, that left one person left as a scapegoat, and that was Triple H. Among those punishments was taking away his King of the Ring victory that was going to be booked for him. And how was Stone Cold Steve Austin involved? Well, the replacement for Triple H winning the King of the Ring was indeed Austin, and it culminated in what is considered one of professional wrestling's greatest promos of all time. Austin getting the chance at King of the Ring to show what he can do to the WWE audience was the commencement of who would become the biggest superstar in wrestling history. And it all happened because of one hug. And without it, who knows if we get the Attitude Era, the mega Hollywood star on The Rock, or if WCW would have won the war between the two wrestling behemoths. And that is it for our top 10 times that WWE was forced to change a story. How did we do? Was there something on the list you disagreed with? Let us know in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, as that is the easiest way to help your fellow wrestling fans find this video. And if you like this video, you may like the rest of our content, so hit that subscribe button for more future videos such as this. And as always, thank you for your support, and we will catch you on the next one.